Let me welcome all of you to Chat with Matt. I'm delighted today to have Mike Lorelli, who is, to me, Mr. Private Equity. He's my go-to person on questions related to private equity. And he's been very kind to speak at our meeting here in Westport when we used to meet in person. And now he's done several Zoom interviews with me and has provided us with a fountain of information. Chat with Matt is designed to provide you with knowledge and from people who are experts in their field. And that's the case here. Mike and I have known each other for a little over 20 years, and every minute of it has been fun. So I'm going to let Mike start by doing his 90-second announcement. You'll have a little sense of who he is and how he got to this point in his life where he is an absolute expert. So Mike, please, why don't you get started? Tell us all about yourself.
All right, so I'm going to do the 12-second elevator speech, not the 90, Matt, which says that I was blessed to have been a PepsiCo president twice. Since then, I've been in the private equity space. I led 5 companies as CEO and was also an operating partner for a New York private equity firm. I've got a coaching practice called Faster Landings, where I help people gain board seats as well as help senior people in transition. So that's my 12 seconds, Matt.
That's great. That's great. You know, it's very important to have people that you can rely on. And those of you who are seeking board seats, as indicated in the promotion pieces, Mike is very open to connecting with you on LinkedIn. And I'm sure he would do at least a 3-minute free conversation over the telephone if you want to talk to him, so he can pitch you on his services and move you down the road. So we're going to get started here. We got a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to be talking about getting board seats. So why don't we start with a discussion of the types of boards and how they're different?
Okay, good. So some of the material we're going to be covering today will be obvious to some of the people in the audience, but I'll give a thorough answer just the same. So the 4 basic types are public company. I think that's the pizza guys telling me it's going to be late.
Did I mention to turn off your cell phone, Mike? I guess I did.
Something we missed. Public company is 1. There you answer to the shareholders, and particularly for the financial people on the call, which is everybody, just about. Part of your role is to make sure you're in compliance with SEC, FASB, the stock exchange requirements.
Mike, if you could, I don't know, your voice got a little lower.
Okay.
Maybe you put your papers on your microphone.
Is this better?
All right, maybe slide in a little bit and you'll be closer to your microphone.
Okay, good. All right. Second type would be private. And here you report to the shareholders, and it could be a family, in which case you are reporting to the family. It could be the CEO. There really are no real requirements, external requirements, other than doing things legally. Then there are advisory boards, where in effect you're a friend of the CEO, in quotes. I don't mean friend in the cushy term, but some of the better founder, owner, entrepreneurs will create an advisory board, which they will populate with people who know the industry, people who can bring in contacts, et cetera, et cetera. And last, nonprofit, where the organization's mission has to be fulfilled, and that's part of the board's role, is to make sure that you stay on track. So most of what I do with my clientele is orienting people toward the paying boards, the profit boards.
Oh, okay.
In that space, I do have a bias toward private equity, which we may or may not get to on the call today.
Yeah. So each of these boards has a slightly different focus, and everyone is well advised to understand that, I guess, if they're applying for those positions.
Well, it's helpful early in the process to understand exactly, what the mission is, and hear it from a chairman's, mouth, not from text or other material. But there's lots to be said for gathering as much material early on as you can. It'll help you screen out things like fit. The company may not be a good fit for you. as an example. It'd be helpful to hear about, why they are recruiting another board member. If someone left, why, all those other kinds of good things. I think I'll go a little deeper on that a little further in the conversation, Matt.
We will. That'll be good. But just, for everybody's benefit, there are big differences. I want a board seat. There are big differences, and we're going to discuss those today. I think the first issue we should address in that context is the decline in public companies. Maybe you'd like to comment even on the cause of all of that.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics. There was a famous Wall Street Journal editorial on November 17th of 2017, op-ed piece, which basically said that the number of public companies in the US with over 500 million in sales had shrunk to 3,671. Now, when a lot of people read that op-ed, they said that can't be, the number's 10,000. It can't be 3,671. And they thought it was a typo. Well, and how could the Wall Street Journal not have a proofreader? Well, guess what? The number was 3,671. And to Matt's point, it was because of all of the M&A over the last 4 decades that the number shrank from 10,000-ish to 3,000-ish. Now that number actually is 4,000 and change today, if you include all companies, not just 500 million and up. But the point is the public bucket has really, really shrunk. Now, I still have the article, and someday the gentleman who wrote it was with Carlisle. I want to invite him to lunch. I congratulate him on a fantastic piece, but I'm just dying to say to him, I wish you would have added one sentence somewhere in there, probably at the end, to comment that in the same 40-year period, that public went from 10,000 to 3,600, private equity exploded from 0 to 16,800, which to me is a very important dynamic, particularly if you're looking for board seats, because if you want to fish where the fish are, well, we just dimensionalized the 2 buckets, 3,000 or 4,000, depending on the cutoff in the public arena, and shrinking, 16,000 and growing private equity.
So that's a real problem. The big money for serving on a board is, I assume, with public companies.
Well, it tends to be proportionate to sales. So for that reason alone, you're absolutely right, Matt. Yes, the big bucks, go on the Amex board.
But you brought up fishing where the fish are. Let's talk a little bit about the number of public companies, private equity, and so forth, and just kind of highlight to everybody where the fish are.
Yeah. So if we include all public companies, not just over 500 million, that number is 4,700. If you assume they've all got about 7 outside directors, that's 33,000 positions. Private equity, I'll use my 16,800. About 85% of them will have boards. They don't need to legally. So there's 30,000 board positions. Plus there's another 5,000 unreported companies out there. I don't mean unreported in an illegal sense, but a lot of family companies and other operations that for whatever reason don't get picked up by the services. So I say there's another 2,500 positions. And then there's the VC world, which has got a base of 8,000 companies. About 80% of them have boards. There's another 13,000 candidates. When you roll all that math up, and I didn't expect anybody to follow it literally, but if you did, you would see that literally half of the board positions, a little less than half of the board positions, come in the private equity space. Great place to play.
No, there's a lot of opportunities out there. So I guess everybody wonders what kinds of people that the board chairman, I guess, is looking for.
So
how does that kind of break out?
Yeah, so let me, I'll take one of the 4 groups just as an example. Let's take PE. So a private equity firm goes out and buys a company, and now it's another one of their portfolio companies. So now they've got to create a board. They don't have to, but they do. So the board is typically the CEO, 3 people from the private equity firm because they want to be able to control, okay? And at least 2, sometimes 3 outside directors. The magic of 2 or 3 is you need an outside director or directors, on the comp committee and on the audit committee. Otherwise you don't have governance. So that's a pretty small board, because what I've just orchestrated for you is 3 outside directors, maybe even just 2. So they're pretty selective with those 2 people. If the private equity firm doesn't know the space, they might go after someone that's got experience in that space, be it consumer, be it QSR, whatever it is, or some other lack of skill that the private equity firm has. But, it's a pretty tight process. The interesting result of it is, and by the way, the PE people don't care about the optics. The public companies worry too much about, we got to have one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these. By the time they're done with one of everybody, in the interest of, being politically correct, they end up with 13 outside directors, and you've got to rent Yankee Stadium to hold the meeting. Now, when the second most recent CEO chairman of GE went in, the first thing he did was he cut the number of outside directors in half. Not saying that was a good idea or not, I'm just observing. But it can be a bit unwieldy if you let this process get out of control. What I enjoy about PE is they don't worry about the optics. The public companies love to have a retired military general, someone with another fancy title, like a university president. They love that kind of panache. PEs just don't care about all that. They say, hey, listen, we're going to add 2 directors or 3. Let's just go out and find 2 good people. Now, the end result surprises people, because a lot of people think you've got to be the sitting CEO. Well, that's absolutely not the case. The exact stat I have here is that only 16% of the outside directors are sitting CEOs, in quotes. The rest are the rest of the C-suite, and then, attorneys and other people from various industry parts and consultants and such, but only 16% are sitting CEOs. So that sits very, very well for your audience here today, Matt, who may have that preconceived notion that you've got to be that sitting CEO to get one of these positions.
I've always wondered how a sitting CFO has time to be on other boards.
Yeah. Well, sitting.
I thought it was a full-time job, Mike.
Yeah, sitting CEO or sitting CFO?
Both.
Yeah. Well, I'll take the CEO case because that's me. I have generally been on 2, sometimes, 3 boards while I have been engaged full-time as a CEO. That's kind of been my place in life since about age 35. I've been a CEO and I've been on 2, sometimes 3 other boards. Now, the method to the madness here is, I'm selective. I got to be very careful here. I'm not going to do a West Coast board, because that means a board meeting is not one day out of my life. It's a day of travel getting there. It's a day of travel getting back. So that one day meeting, even though it was only 5 hours, it was 3 days out of my life. I can't afford that.
I know.
Times 4 meetings a year. I'm selective about my ability to ingress and egress, get in and out. I love this one board I was on that was an Atlanta company. I could get the flight out of White Plains, make the management dinner, be on the flight back the next afternoon. It was a short time out of my life. I don't do troubled companies. I don't want to be on a board of a company that's holding regular conference calls because they can't figure out how to make payroll next Tuesday. So I steer away from startups. So I guess my long answer to your question, and it could be a whole separate webinar, Matt, is if you're selective about the boards that you go on, and only go on boards of good company, well-managed, 4 meetings a year, not monthly, to be on 2 boards in addition to your day job is manageable, and with 100% meeting attendance.
Good. We have a question, but I'm going to delay it for just a second. So a lot of people think if they're not working, they're not really eligible for board work. But that's some impediment. But they don't they engage a lot of retired people?
Well, I would say probably 45%. This is Mike's stat. 45% of the outside directors are retired, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no stigma attached. That's
an opportunity to bring your wealth of experience to bear.
Yeah. And usually those are the ones that are more volunteering of their time to help coach and mentor people in the company because they've got the time.
And I gather they're older.
Yeah,
That's
now,
not an impediment. Certainly not with the private equity people. They don't care how old you are. They just want to
Yeah.
know how to fix things.
yeah, so I'm glad you add that piece because in the public arena, it's different. They've got age limits, which I think is discriminatory, but it is what it is. But many of them, have age limitations. So, you reach a point where a public company is not going to look at you. That doesn't happen in PE.
No, I love them because, I have a search practice and I've sent PE companies people in their 70s and they will talk to them and actively consider them as long as they can fix the exact problem.
Right.
And that they're going to be breathing in 3 to 5 years.
Yep. Now, the 3 to 5 that you mentioned is an interesting point for another reason, though. So I want to just go off on a small tangent, Matt. The average length of time that a private equity firm will own a particular portfolio company is 5.2 years. It's not infinitum, which is a public company. So, their time horizon is different. And even as they're picking management players, they're not gun shy about hiring someone who may be in their 60s or 70s and even late 70s, because they're not buying you for life. They're basically renting you for the 5.2 years that they own that company. So the same kind of thinking rolls over, I guess, into the board side of their equation as well.
So the question we have is, do you think limited partnerships are starting to notice the construct, diversity, independence, so forth of PE VC portfolio boards? Or are they not at that level yet?
No. The word I would use is it's creeping into the LPs. It's not as fixed there as it would be. Take California as extreme where it's law. But they're getting there. So Rome wasn't built in a day. Let's give them credit for trying. I was blessed that I am blessed that the companies where I'm on the board, we were very high on the diversity notion, a long time ago. It's embarrassing. 10 years ago, the percentage of women on boards was 11%. Can you believe that? 11%.
Yeah.
So this one particular company where I enjoyed serving 2 terms, Atlanta-based company, we as a board, basically made a commitment in one of our meetings that the next time we have a C-level opening or a board level opening, we're going to tell the recruiter the last thing we want to see is a white male. We want to see a diversity candidate, which could be female, Black, Hispanic, whatever. But, let's get some diversity on this board.
My wife has done some presentations to private equity groups on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get her to do it, diversity, inclusion, and equity, so that it can be abbreviated DIE, but that's just me. But some of the private equity groups are very interested in this idea now, diversity of opinion, and with the idea that makes them more money by having a diversity on their board.
Yeah, it brings a different perspective on how decisions are made, and it has ramifications that are sometimes hard to articulate, but they are real. And I'm glad Peggy's doing that. I'm a big fan on this cause myself.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about messaging? You've now set out the landscape a bit. Why don't we talk about your messaging and the difference between resumes and board material you would send out on your behalf?
Yeah, good. So when Matt uses the term messaging, we are referring to your resume, your bio, your value proposition, which we'll come to, the letters that you send out, your LinkedIn profile, and your elevator speech. So let's just take these one at a time. Matt, let me just do a 60-second diversion here. I just want to shut this one piece off. Sorry about that. On the resume, your typical resume would highlight all of your type A behaviors, the dragons you slayed, how you bought this company, integrated it, eliminated 1.5 points of G&A and 400 people. Those are the kinds of things you might talk about in your resume, which is fine. And that's fact-based. and that's meaningful in terms of shareholder value. Your resume, on the other hand, would not skip the opportunity to spend a few lines talking about your coaching abilities, your mentoring abilities, people that you tucked under your wing, people that your bosses, your seniors asked you to mentor because maybe they were, fledgling and needed a little helping hand. So those are the high potential people that you hired that went to further places in your own company or now are the EVPs of XYZ Semiconductor. So between a resume and your board-oriented resume, and by the way, you don't need 2 documents. What I would do is I would build these things into your base document and only have 1 resume and use that regardless of the purpose. Don't complicate your life with a resume and then a board resume. No, don't do that. But those are the kinds of things you would weave into a resume, a board-oriented resume, as opposed to what you're probably using today. Bio.
So the issue is really being an active participant on a board where you're coaching everybody around you with your knowledge and experience.
Well, going back to this Atlanta company now for probably the last time today, on 2 occasions, they asked me to coach 2 board members. It was a family-owned business. Both of those family members were on the board and they were having a hard time keeping up. And the chairman said to me, Mike, we can't have these 2 family members fail. I know you're a coach. Would you mind taking these 2 aside, get them under your wing and make sure that they don't, man, I was flattered. So that's all good stuff. I'll shift to bio. A bio should be 2/3 of a page, no longer. Good picture of you, written at 30,000 feet, very high ground. When someone just pops it up and they open the PDF, it should immediately look like this is a $500,000 a year person. Now, a resume, no matter how good it is, even my own, no matter how good a resume is, at the end of the day, it just looks tactical, which you're talking about widgets and this and that, and you did this, and you go on to a 3rd page, and you can put a lot of people to sleep. The bio is different. It's very, very high ground. As I said, a good picture, a good opening summary of what you do, a little bit of humility, throw in how you started with at the bottom of a ladder and work your way up and got promoted as a result of accomplishments. And then at the end, throw in a little personal touch. Matt enjoys sailing and his wife, Peggy, as well as running his 2 consulting business. Something personal, because at the end of the day, people want to hire a human being, not a coach. So those are my thoughts on bio, the most important one being length. I got to tell you, if it's more than a page, you're basically showing the other person you don't know how to write a bio and you don't know how to operate at 30,000 feet. The next piece is your value proposition. The worst way in the world to engage in a conversation about being a board candidate is to say that I'm looking to be on boards. That's a me statement. Who cares that you're looking to be on boards? All I care about is what you're going to do for shareholder value for me, the company.
Yep.
So I'll give you one example here. When I was interviewing to go on the board of Rita's Italian Ices, when I read from their press releases why they bought Rita's Falconet Capital, one of the reasons was they thought it had legs outside of the US. I looked at the bios of all the people, all the operating partners of Falconet. None of them had any QSR experience, quick service restaurant. None of them had any international experience. So when I went into my interviews at Falconet Capital, I had carefully, scripted my elevator speech, my value proposition rather, so that I closed every meeting by saying the following thing. I would say, Harry, I really have enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot about Rita's just by the questions you're asking. I think if you put me on the board where I could add value is I know both QSR and I know international. You know that I built Pizza Hut's international division. So I could be a good sounding board to the CEO as he's building the global footprint. Now, that was my answer. I tend to answer like a PowerPoint slide. Mike basically gave 3 bullets. He knows QSR, Falconet Capital doesn't. That's a big plus, why we should want Mike. Number 2, Mike knows the international arena, and he could be accessible to the CEO, probably answer a question like that and save the CEO, $250,000 of McKinsey fees. So I guess my point is your value proposition should be oriented around what you could bring to the equation, and dribble it out there, and don't be bashful. Certainly end the meeting, with a closing line like that. So that's my piece on value proposition. Matt, have
And I'm taking from what you just said that you did a lot of research on the other board members.
Oh, yeah. Their bios, which sometimes are on the company website, their LinkedIn profiles. So I knew their backgrounds so that I could construct my own skills map. And we're going to do this, I think, toward the end, Matt, was one of the questions you had for me, is the skills map exercise. Maybe
we can talk about that in another section. That's good. So one of the things that surprised me was the importance of your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. So this is a pet subject of mine. The LinkedIn people are kind of fascinating up there, in Seattle, now Microsoft. They intentionally have no instruction sheet. They guard the secret sauce, so to speak, and they keep you guessing. And I think they have a lot of fun keeping the adults guessing. How does the algorithm work? Well, I've had a lot of fun over the years, in effect, reverse engineering the algorithm by massive trial and error. And I've distilled it down to a couple of salient points. Number one, 80% of the LinkedIn traction, the algorithm tracking you, 80% of it comes down to getting the headline right and the about section right. So that sounds pretty simple. We've just narrowed it down to two areas, the headline and the about section. So now let me take those two apart one by one. In the headline, there are about 160 available characters. You want to populate it with keywords that a recruiter is going to use if he wanted to find somebody like you. Now, after you've populated it with enough of those words, if there still is space, then by all means, tell me your present name, rank, and serial number, or the name, rank, and serial number of your last position. But don't put that in first at the expense of having the right keywords in there.
We're going to show your LinkedIn profile in a couple minutes.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I wanted you to cover. I was surprised by the statistic you sent me that half the CEOs and C-level candidates for boards are found on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That was kind of surprising.
Yeah. So I will tell you, if I were to run a new clock of the calls I get for board seats in the last 7.5 or so years, I would say half came about because someone did a query on my LinkedIn profile. I would say 2/3 of the day job situations that I get calls on these days were originated because the recruiter, did a query on LinkedIn and called me out of the blue. You cannot ignore LinkedIn. Every day, they take another bite out of the cheese of Heidrick and Spencer and Korn Ferry. Those poor souls, don't know what to do about it. The reality is there's nothing they can do about it. Uber is going to take over Yellow Cab, for all the reasons that we know. Same with LinkedIn versus traditional search.
Yeah, they just have more. They have more data on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, I'm guessing. I know. All the companies that I run, I love making sales calls. Right. I never call on somebody I don't know or I haven't met before without looking at their LinkedIn profile the day before. Tells me a lot about the person. Maybe a couple of personal points or two that I might use as icebreakers. But I surely look at the person's LinkedIn profile. And that's very, very, very obvious today. People check you out on LinkedIn. So the way I say this is, even if you're not expecting to be found on LinkedIn, people will check you out on your LinkedIn profile. There's no reason why it shouldn't be every bit as good as you are. Spend as much time on your LinkedIn profile as you do on your resume. Most people spend 50 hours on a resume to get it to perfection. God bless, it is perfect. Then they go off and they spend 3 hours on their LinkedIn profile. I want to put a gun to my head.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. Well, I can show your graph if you want. We can talk about the killer and below average.
Oh yeah,
that might be powerful.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think everybody can see it. I'm not going to blow it up because everything disappears then. But maybe you want to talk everybody through this.
Yeah, so this is on my website. My website, which I encourage everyone to check out, is fasterlandings.com. Faster Landings, plural, think pilot. And this is a graphic that I have on there where I talk about LinkedIn. And it basically says, you know, there are 720 million LinkedIn members. If someone is doing a query and you have a below average or very good profile, you know, you're one in thousands of people. Forget it. You might as well not have ever been born. You're not going to be found. You might as well not have a LinkedIn profile. You know, you are invisible. You got to be in that top band. A good recruiter is going to set aside an hour. He's saying to himself, I'm going to devote 60 minutes. I'm going to go in and do a LinkedIn query. I'm going to skim about 45 LinkedIn profiles, which means about a minute apiece. And I'll come up with my short list of 10 people that I'll ask one of my MBAs to go interview. You got to be in that top, you know, line. You got to be in that killer status, 1 in the 70, you know, not 1 in the 7,000. So please, instead of 50 hours in your resume, an hour and a half on your LinkedIn profile, how about 50 hours in your LinkedIn profile, an hour and a half on your resume?
So that we can, now, this will be the time to talk about this section of your
Yeah.
LinkedIn
Yeah, so
profile, and how you've optimized it.
Yeah, so I'm glad you're actually pulling the actual one up here, Matt, because it gives me the opportunity to talk to other things that are important, which include punctuation. So notice the keywords that I put in: CEO, interim CEO, outside director, private equity, operating partner, board coach, CEO, Accent Foods, which was my last day job, company I ran for a private equity firm. Now, people doing a query for any one of those topics, I want to hear about it. And odds are fair that I'm going to get pulled up on LinkedIn because I've got these very prominently in my headline. The side comment, though, that I want to make now that Matt is putting this up is punctuation matters. Notice I've separated those keywords with these vertical bars, also known as spikes. Some people call them pipes, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. But when the algorithm sees that pike, it says to itself, what's to the left of it is a different thought than what's to the right of it. Most people make the mistake of using commas or forward slashes. The LinkedIn algorithm has no idea what a comma or a forward slash means. This is the correct way to punctuate in the headline. Matt, by chance, do you have the other slide?
Yes.
And then the about section, because remember I said 80% of the effectiveness comes down to getting 2 things right: the headline, which we just covered, the about section. I find the best format for the about section, excuse me, is a very crisp, tight, high ground opening elevator speech that basically tells me almost everything I want to know about you. Then create a few subheads that tell me where you shoot the lights out, okay, and use subheads to list those. And then under each of the subheads, prove it. Give me the evidence. So if someone's looking for an outside board member, you know, I've got a good hook because it's all over my headline. Odds are high I'm going to get, you know, some pull from that. Then when they open my profile, my opening elevator speech says Mike is a certified outside director. I mentioned outside director one more time in that paragraph. Then I've got a call out. It's my second subhead, accredited outside director, independent director. And then if someone really wanted to drill down deep underneath that subhead called independent director, I prove it. You know, he's master's level at the NACD. He's chaired 3 public comp committees. There is no way in the world that I'm not going to get a phone call on this search. So I guess to recap, going back, make sure your headline has got your keywords, the right searchable keywords. Don't waste a lot of space telling me your day job. The only person likely to go in and do a query using your exact present title is probably your mother. Fill it out with keywords that you want people to find you for. And then in your about section, perhaps use this format that I'm suggesting: tight speech, use subheads, prove it with evidence.
So how do we get started here?
All right.
I think your recommendation is people should first seek to get on a nonprofit board, gain a little experience.
Nonprofits
Is
matter.
that how you got started?
Um, well, I had done nonprofits, earlier in my life. It's not actually by design how I got started. But what's interesting here is when you see the bio of any prominent CEO, CEO of PepsiCo or GE or whoever, you'll always see that they've got a nonprofit that they devote time to. They're on the board of the Leukemia Society or something like that. And that nonprofit experience helps. So if you have zero board experience and you're looking to bulk up some board background, I would keep a keen eye open to going on a nonprofit. If you're fortunate enough to have a choice of a few to go on, I would lean toward the major national recognized brands, United Ways, those kinds of things, as opposed to a smaller unrecognized one. But to Matt's point, regardless, it is a great way to get started. The experience does count.
Good. So let's go back. Let's circle back to the board resume, and you can highlight some of the things that are important about it. So now it's up on the screen, and
yeah. So the contrast I was.
You mentioned some of these points, but maybe having out in front of everybody will be helpful.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm going to concentrate on is the third to the last point. And this is the way you talk in the interview. Can you be nose in, fingers out? What that means, can you be inquisitive without trying to put your own hands on the throttle, which is the temptation for most of us type A's, right? And then the second bullet is, can you walk, talk, and act at 30,000 feet? That's where boards have conversations, not at 10 feet. At the end of the day, and this is the most important concept to understand, and it's the last point where Matt has his cursor. To land the role, you're up against 4 or 5 other candidates that are being presented by the recruiter. At the end of the day, being a perfect candidate who's exactly on the spec doesn't get you that board seat. At the end of the day, you've got to be the tallest duck in the pond, meaning you're out there with 4 other ducks. You've got to be the tallest one, and you should presume that the other 4 are also exactly on the spec. So this is an important thing for you to keep in mind. The best way that you can generate that kind of intrigue is with the second to the last bullet, and that is by bringing out value that you could bring to the board. As I showed you previously, how I showed Falconhead, I knew International and I knew QSR friends, and they didn't.
Yeah. So your value proposition.
Yeah,
And
that's exactly what Matt's got here. And this is exactly how I ended every interview. I think I can add value to the board because I know both QSR and International, and I could be a great sounding board to the CEO as he's building the footprint. Now, I got to tell you, that is a far better ending of an interview than Harry. I enjoyed the last hour. I've learned from your questions. I hope I get the job. The latter I call a flat soda. That does not, distinguish you from the other candidates that they're meeting today. Something like what I've written here is a differentiator. It tells me exactly what Mike could do for shareholder value.
So we can use slides here. I wasn't planning to use this particular one, but we're going out to market now.
Yeah. So when I hear from clients how they landed a board role, if they haven't volunteered it, I always ask. And one of the things I teach in my program is you got to let people know you're interested in boards. Each of us knows 500 people at our level. What are the odds if any one of those 500 people hears about a board opening, your name is going to be on the tip of their tongue? Probably 0. But if you single somebody out and let them know you're interested in boards, it's miraculous. People never forget. So, I encourage people, and I'm not sure if this is the next slide or not, Matt.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, no, it isn't. I'm sorry. I encourage people to construct a list of 40 people who you think might hear about board seats. in the next couple of years, a board opening, and do an outreach to them. It's a pain in the butt. It means 40 people. If you work on one a day with phone tag, it'll take you 2 months. If you can't do it by phone, at least shoot an email. Hey, John, hope you're doing well. I know we've been, I haven't been catching up regularly, but things are good on my end. I hope on yours too. I'm writing because at this point in my career, I'm making a concerted effort to get on a couple of good boards. I know you're the kind of person who periodically might hear about such vacancies. Man, I'd be flattered if you threw my name in. In fact, I'm attaching my bio just so you have it. Very short, very to the point, and you're admitting upfront you're contacting them for a selfish reason. Then the next objection I get from an audience is, well, I don't know 40 such people. And I say, hold on a second. When you think about it, every CFO belongs on that list of 40. Everybody on a board belongs on that list. All the law firms you've worked with, all your companies, all of the audit firms you've worked with, your personal accountant, all the recruiters that have either presented you or you've given business to, industry colleagues, bosses, subordinates in high places. Somebody you hired 5 years ago as a junior accountant, and today he's EVP at XYZ Semiconductor. He belongs on that list. So I think for everybody in your audience, knowing the composition of FENG, I think is not going to have a hard time constructing a list of 40 people to do an outreach to. It is a lot of work.
Yeah. So I think that's a good segue into the having well thought out answers.
Yeah. And this is an important point because, you don't want to be surprised. I promise you all of these questions you will get asked. And you need to rehearse the night before what your soundbite answer is going to be. I'll give you one example. Let's take the second to the last one. What committee are you best suited for? When I get asked that question, I say, Harry, a couple of thoughts. Number one, I understand service to the Queen. So wherever the CEO would like to deploy me, I'm happy to go on that committee. Having said that, audit would not be a sweet spot of mine. While I've served on several audit committees and I'm willing to do it again, by no means am I qualified to be an audit chair. On the other hand, comp is a sweet spot of mine. In fact, I've chaired 3 compensation committees. Now, as I said earlier, I tend to answer questions like a PowerPoint slide. What has Mike said with that answer? He's registered 3 thoughts. Number one, he gets that his purpose is to serve. Service to the Queen. Number 2, he voluntarily crapped all over his audit skills, which indirectly implies now if he tells me something he's good at, that's probably going to be pretty accurate too. But in any event, that's not my point. My point is not my answer. My point is the night before you go in, look at this list, pull up this file, make sure you've got your soundbite answer to these questions. I'm glad you brought this one up, Matt.
Yeah. So I think the next thing we should talk about is the mapping the board. You started discussing it a little bit. The board map.
Yeah. So I call it the skills map or board map. Are we able to pull a slide up on this one, Matt?
I thought you just talked through it.
Okay.
The slide isn't very readable. So you talked a little bit about it, and I thought that was very helpful.
Yeah. All right.
So doing your research and so forth.
Yeah. So what I do when I go into an interview for a board position, I think about what skills I think that company needs to be successful in the marketplace. And maybe marketing is number 1 on the list. Maybe sales is number 2 on the list. Maybe ops is number 3 on the list. Maybe international is number 4 on the list, et cetera, et cetera. And then I take the time and the patience to go through the bios and the LinkedIn profiles of all the board members and all of the people at the VP level and above in the company. And I construct a composite that shows these are the skills the company needs, ranked in descending order. And I populate that with the names, first names of the people, either board members or VPs in the company. And what I try to do is identify gaps where I think the company needs a skill at the board level and it's not covered right now. And Mike Lorelli, with his background as an addition, could fill that gap. I'll give you an example. A company called AeroGrow, where I interviewed the chairman, had a vision to go outside the US, yet nobody at the board level or at the VP level had any international experience whatsoever, whereas I built Pizza Hut's international division. So when I described the skills matrix in that interview process, I basically painted the picture of that skills map: marketing, sales, finance, operations, international, et cetera. And I showed that they had a gaping hole in skills on the international side. And guess what? Mike Lorelli could fill that. They also had a gaping hole in skills in terms of going beyond internet and calling on retailers someday. And Mike Lorelli could fill that gap. So this notion of doing a skills map, board map, whichever you call it, is a very powerful exercise. You could either do it verbally. I've had some candidates literally put this down on an Excel sheet, but it's a very powerful way to demonstrate a couple of things. Number one, how studious you are and how much you study the company. Number two, your instincts, because I'd be willing to bet anybody in this audience looking at a company with only 5 minutes notice could probably draw that skills map and list the right skills and probably be 85% right. Then you got to do some homework and populate it with names, look for gaps which you can fill, and then bring those out in the interview process. Does that answer it, Matt?
Yeah, oh, very much so. I'm glad you went back over, because you introduced it, but I appreciate the additional color. I'm sure everybody else did. Let's look at I think the next thing we should do is look at a sample letter. And you can tell everybody the high points for this.
Yeah. So first of all, it's short. It's one page. Number two, you want it to be very skimmable, eyeball friendly. Bullets make things skimmable and make it eyeball friendly. My eye can quickly go down that left column, pick up those bullet points in about 2 seconds. And then if I want to read more, well, then I'll scroll over to the right and read the sentence that the person wrote. And then if I still want to know more, well, I'll open the attachment, which is the resume or the bio. So, these are the key points of a good letter to private equity people: short, skimmable, write it at 30,000 feet, tell me why you're different. A little personal touch never hurts. If you notice my second to last paragraph, most of all, I enjoy coaching others, having brought along many executives in my career. Whoa, talk about softer qualities as opposed to the dragon slaying. There's a beautiful one.
Yeah, no, it's very important to have I think people underestimate this cover letter. This is basically a cover letter, and it's what I call a gateway drug.
Yeah.
I've got the things in there that might interest me, and if I need more information, your phone number is there.
Yep.
That's a good way to approach it. So I guess the next topic here, let's see here. Why don't you just talk us through compensation? What kinds of, if you're serving on a public company board, private company, private equity, what does the compensation look like?
Yeah.
For financial people, we're interested in money, Mike.
I guess the general observation is that it tends to be proportionate to the company size. Of the bigger companies pay more, the smaller companies pay less. That's not a surprise. The public companies tend to pay more, not because they like to, but just because they tend to be the bigger companies. Private equity companies pay less, not because they're cheap, but they are cheap, but because they tend to be the smaller companies. I would say people on your audience today, Matt, should be looking at cash comp of 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80-ish, 90, 100, and a equity component, and maybe a couple of other frills thrown in there. But you know, it's interesting because in the years that I've been on boards, I've been very blessed that my W-2 from the boards has amounted to a fair amount of change and has basically covered my burn rate at all. Now, at some point in time, I will give up this day job stuff, but I'm never going to give up the board work. And one of the reasons why I'm not going to give it up is it's kind of fun that those W-2s add up. It covers my burn rate at home, and I never have to touch my nest egg. I'll just throw in here because it's important. The second reason why I will never give up board work is it's just too much fun. It's just too engaging. You know, I'm not going to bake cookies and play golf my whole life, 24/7. Yeah, I am going to play golf and do other kinds of stuff, but I've got to have something else in my life. And getting into another boardroom and intersecting yourself with another management team and their issues and strategies, and they're genuinely interested in your point of view, that's just very motivating for me. When I land at LaGuardia Airport after a board meeting like that, I got to tell you, my cobwebs are cleared. I feel like a new man. So someday when I do cut out the day job, I'm never going to give up the boards. The two reasons are I love the intellectual engagement. And number two, the comp ain't bad. Number three, I might add, and I'm making this up as I go along, I think it's probably one of the best preventative cures for dementia.
Yeah.
just having something in your life that's keeping your neurons firing.
Right. But the way I look at it, I'm in my mid 70s now, so all these people only exist to amuse me. I enjoy the problems and solving them, and with all the experience I bring to the party, it's nice to know I'm still relevant and that I have something to offer. And board work, from your description, can be very not only financially rewarding but mentally rewarding.
Amen.
Did you want to talk about? We have a question. Did you have some guidelines on sample elevator speeches for us?
Well, sample elevator.
We talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, sample elevator speech would be, the most extreme example would be the one that I gave at the beginning of this conference call. I'm Mike Lorelli. I was blessed to have been a PepsiCo president twice. I've spent the last 25 years running private equity-backed companies, including one role as an operating partner for a PE firm. It's my elevator speech. Anybody that goes on past 30 seconds is guaranteed to put their audience to sleep. Yeah.
For those of you who are interested, since you're all members of the FENG, there is a guideline on how to do a 90-second announcement on our website. Piece my wife, who is a communications expert, has written based on my presentations during chapter meetings. Very concise, and I think you'll find it hits the main points. You can't do a total well, in personal selling terms, you'll love this. It's called throwing up on the customer, telling them too much stuff. You've got to be pithy. You've got to be using what's called the magic rule of threes. You can't tell them too much stuff. To Mike's point.
Yeah, I actually take that even to an extreme, Matt. I agree with you 100%. But my feeling is that if you tell people 7 things, they remember nothing. Tell them 6, they remember nothing. Tell them 5, they remember nothing. Tell them 4, maybe they remember 2. Tell them 3, they probably remember 2. Tell them 2, they probably remember 2. Tell them 1, they remember 1. So avoid the temptation to be an encyclopedia and tell them 7 or 6. You're just going to put them to sleep. So you want to talk a little bit about your faster landings? Yeah. So I just
everybody has your contact information, by the way, from the promotion piece.
Okay, good. So 2 things. Number 1, I would encourage everybody to connect with me on LinkedIn. Simply being connected to me improves you in the rankings because of the spread that my LinkedIn profile has and the followership that I have. So that's one point. The other one is it's worth 5 minutes to peruse the site. It's devoted toward helping people land board seats. There are a couple of other tips on there that I won't go back and retrace now, but it's worth your spending 5 minutes. Fasterlandings.com.
Well, it's all in the promotion piece, how to reach Mike. Nobody in our group hides. We're all friends. I put in the chat box, if you want to take a look at it. Mike has an expert helper. And if you need her services, Mike swears by her. I've had some conversations with her in recent months, and she's a very impressive person. Karen Kerpen.
Yeah, she does all of my materials, anything that's physical. The resume, the LinkedIn profile, website, etc. She's done that work for me. Great lady.
Yeah, so we have a few more minutes. If there are more questions, you can unmute and ask them. And it's been a very enlightening conversation, Mike.
Great.
Everybody talks about board seats, but you need to have some understanding of how to go about getting them. We're not going to sit here silently. Mike, what did we miss?
I think you've covered the full bandwidth, Matt. You always do.
Well, you've been you've delivered a lot of information. Let's see what else we got here.
I know that Matt pushed out a couple of articles that maybe some of you had a chance to read. On the website, there were many more, so that's another reason why taking a look at the faster landings could be helpful.
Okay.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Mike. This is Mila McGuire. Sorry, I'm not on video. Mike, great presentation. So informative. Quick question. Average trajectory from actively starting to seek and prepare for board seats to actually landing, is realistic expectation 2 to 3 years what you've seen, or is it longer?
I would say 1 year. From the day you buckle down, if you take all of these steps, if your expectation is to get on 1 or perhaps 2 good boards at the end of a year, that's a realistic expectation. You'll probably satisfy it. If you expect your phone is going to ring next Monday, forget it.
There's a lot of prep work, and personally, I was surprised how many positions are recruited from LinkedIn. I was sure it was networking. I was sitting in the what is it, the soda fountain, and getting discovered for a starring role in a movie. That kind of blows me away. But I think your message to everyone has been LinkedIn is an important tool, and you've got to do it right.
Right.
Any other comments? I like meetings to start on time and end on time. We've covered a lot of ground. This meeting, again, has been recorded, and I'll post how to get to it in the newsletter, and we'll put it on our website as well in the near term. Another question before we close?
Quick one, if I would. Mike, is there an average or expected amount of time that a company would expect from its board members?
Boy, that could range from 60 hours for a private company to 300 hours for a very complicated public company. Anything in between those two goalposts could be the possibility.
Good, thank you.
But I'd say 60 would be the minimum, because you got to stay on top of stuff. And when they push material out for board members to read, you really got to be serious about reading it. When they send the board book out, you really got to be serious about reading it, not skimming it. So I would say 60 would be the minimum. But when you think about the number of hours there are in a month, that's the reason, one of the reasons why in my own life, being on 2 boards was not problematic.
All right, any other questions? We're 1 minute over. All right, well, I want to thank Mike. You have his email address. You can write to him if you have more questions. He's always very kind and responsive to people. I want to thank you for joining us on Chat with Matt. I'm going to try to come up with other great speakers for you to listen to. It's going to be hard to top Mike, of course, but so Mike, thank you for devoting your time to this, and we'll see you again on Chat with Matt. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and stay well.